Hi everyone, Anthony Trentano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you're doing well. And today in this video, I'm hoping to do a bit of an interesting collective retrospective where a series of writers from The Needle Drop and I are going to be talking about a series of records that have just turned 20 this year. In fact, these little conversations you're about to see are a part of a larger piece on the website right now that basically tribute and point out a series of records that, again, have become classics at this point, have turned 20, have maintained quite a bit of cultural weight over that point in time, and, just kind of drawing attention back to them and talking about what still makes them great today. So this video here is essentially an extension of that with a handful of writers involved in the piece, kind of going back and talking about some of these albums from Madonna, from Sufjan Stevens, Gorillaz, and more. So that's essentially that. Let's get into the whole thing. Bam. Drew.
Anthony.
Gorillaz, Demon Days. That's the one you went with. It's 20 years old. Why does that even matter?
I don't know. It's kind of weird given like a retrospective look on an album that I was 5 years old when it came out, So, why does it still matter? It's because it's fucking awesome. That's really the most, the only thing that you can really say on it looking back from 20 years. I think like the fact that Gorillaz is still around right now is almost kind of a miracle because it kind of seemed like a gimmick back in the day. I feel like the first album probably was viewed as that. Again, I wasn't, necessarily there to see the musical landscape of the time, but I feel like they came out with Demon Days and people undeniably knew that this was like a musical outfit that had to be respected.
I'll say this as somebody who was a lot older during that time and sort of witnessed a very interesting, I'll say like limbo period for the band. I think there was a point in time where me and everybody who might have been watching MTV around this era were like completely blown away by like the Clint Eastwood song, music video, just all of that. During that period of time, sales exposure, like most, if not all of that was just CD based, you go into the store off of a hot single, off of a hot track you really liked, you buy the CD and, that's how you're hearing the whole album for the most part. And I'll tell you, there was a good period of years where a lot of people bought that CD and immediately afterwards chucked it into the used bin because there's nothing else on that album that sounds like Clint Eastwood. And I think a lot of people went into the record maybe sort of knowing the David Albarn connection a little bit, but mostly went into it expecting to hear like more like that. I don't think they really fully understood like what Damon, and maybe even Damon didn't know, like what Damon's potential full vision was in terms of like all the genres, all the sounds, and all the world building that he wanted to do with Gorillaz. And then we're being hit with, over a dozen other tracks, some of which are like dancier, some of which are punkier. Clint Eastwood sort of seems to be like the lone moment that feels that, but every single song on the album feels like a lone moment. You know what I mean? So it was a while before not only this album, but a little bit later before people started to really kind of fully understand, oh, wait a second, this is actually kind of cool. We need to go back to this and actually appreciate it for what it was.
Yeah. And I feel like, and this might not be necessarily true, but it's the way that I interpret it listening to him is I feel like that first album, the debut was like, I feel like I don't hold it even close to in the same regard as like Demon Days or Plastic Beach. And I feel like Damon and anybody who's collaborating with were like really going into the cartoon part of it. And they were trying to make their songs sound like it would from a cartoon band. And I feel like then with Demon Days, there's still songs that do sound like it, but I think he kind of ditched that more so and started going after sounds that actually sounded really good and songs that sounded really good on their own and really started, blending genres in a way that wouldn't just be like, oh, this song sounds like it could be made by four like cartoon monster people. I don't even know what they are necessarily, but Demon Days definitely like was a turn that I feel like made people realize, and it made me from being like that age. It was one of the first albums I ever listened to start to finish. Kind of like, no, like, oh, this is what music like can do. It's not necessarily a experimental album, but it's still so weird and still like mainstream at the same time that I feel like that combination of weirdness and mainstream appeal you don't really see too often anymore. And I think that's why people are still listening to like Feel Good Inc. 20 years on, where like songs, by James Blunt that were popular at the same time now sound really dated and, you know, shitty if we want to really, if we want to use that word here. But no, I think that there was not necessarily a ton of innovation, but just that ability to blend so many genres in such a mainstream way is something that hasn't been done too many times since.
That's a point I would like you to kind of explain if you could, because I
Hmm.
feel like out of all the albums that we're talking about in this video, and all of them are great in their own right. Um, I feel like comparatively, and check me in the comments if you disagree, and you tell me if you disagree. But I feel like out of all the records that we're talking about, and maybe even all the records that are in sort of like the 2005 piece in general, um, on the website, I feel like this one has aged the least. I feel like this one
I
feels and sounds like the most today, as it were. Like I still see and hear people kind of like casually throwing on the bigger singles and Dare and so on and so forth from this record. Just being like, oh, Gorillaz banger that we all like, and there's something about the music on this record that sort of seems to transcend music communities, regardless of what type of music is your specialty or whatever you focus on or obsess with the most. Like everybody has a song or two off this record that they're absolutely in love with. And I still feel like there's a lot of sounds and aesthetics and ideas that people still borrow for songs today on this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree, but it's like that's the thing. It's not to say like other albums or songs that have maybe aged like they sound like they came from 2005 are like bad songs or like they've even aged
No,
poorly.
absolutely not. I'm just sort of saying like there's I guess like a timelessness to this one that
For sure.
isn't to say that like all these other albums are like covered in dust on the shelf and they're slowly becoming more irrelevant. But it I guess it's just interesting because I guess the reason that this album doesn't sound like we can place it within a certain era or certain years because it doesn't necessarily feel based on a particular trend that was prevailing at the time, nor a trend that came after or wherever. It's kind of something that you can't really a sound that you can't really attach to a certain kind of moment that occurred at a certain type of space or context. And
Yep.
and maybe a big reason as to why that is like gorillas just kind of exist in their own fucking cartoon world context. You know what I mean? They don't exist in the real world. They don't exist in our world. They just kind of exist in their weird little gorillas world. So I guess it makes sense that the music that they make just kind of feels like it's in whatever frozen in time context that they're existing in.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. Yeah, I mean, quite literally, they don't age because they're cartoons, but like for the
Right.
music itself, it's hard to like trace back some of the influences. Like a song like "Oh Green World," like where does that even fucking come from? Like that's just such a strange, weird, like funky sound that could only come from a cartoon band like the Gorillaz. Like it's so out there, it's so weird. I remember that being like I played that for my dad when I was like 11 years old, and he was like, "Don't ever play that around me again. That was the weirdest thing you've ever played." And I was like, "I don't know, dude. I think it's pretty awesome." So I don't know. I mean, even Feel Good Inc., I still hear out all the time. I feel like there's younger people still starting to like discover that song specifically, and it still doesn't sound like anything else you're hearing anywhere else. Like I know it just hit over 1 billion streams recently. It means people are still constantly playing it. I worked at a school for 3 years, and I had a 16-year-old kid who tried like putting me on to Feel Good Inc. He was like, "Yo, you hear this shit yet?" And he like played it for me. I was like, "Yeah, dude, I know Feel Good Inc., but I'm glad you found it. It's awesome."
Right.
So yeah, there's just a certain timelessness. There's such a weirdness that like I don't hear from the Gorillaz anymore themselves. I haven't heard that on their last few. A little bit in Song Machine, but not quite as much.
Hmm.
And there's kind of this grittiness to this album, which is why I've always preferred Demon Days to Plastic Beats just a little bit more because
Hmm.
Danger Mouse's influence on it is so like apparent, especially in the drums. And yeah, there's just a little darker energy to it all the way through the record. There is on the album cover art as well. There is in all the music videos. Obviously, the lyrics are pretty weird, but they're pretty dark for the most part. It's just like it's kind of a little pocket that I haven't seen Gorillaz get back into. They've been on some pretty like bubblegummy synthy stuff recently, and I would love to see them get into that kind of alternative, grittier rock bag that they were in 2005 for sure.
Uh, Last comment on this, we were talking about like the timelessness of the record, but like, what do you feel like was kind of put into this album to make it so endlessly replayable too? Because there are some records, in my opinion, that I love, but they're very heavy listens, and I can't really put them on all the time because of just kind of like the nature of the experience, even though they are like really incredible records that I hold in high regard. And there's some classic albums that like they're great and we love them, and we continue to write about how great they are because they're touchstones and they're amazing, but like maybe they don't continue to get the kind of endlessly viral play that like Feel Good Inc. does. You know what I mean? They just like kind of stand there like a statue, and we visit them every once in a while just to remind ourselves of like, this is great. And we're supposed to, remember that this is great because it did this and that and the other thing. Gorillaz is, a band that made an album here that, yeah, it's like one of those pillar records, but simultaneously it's still an album that people just kind of put on for fun casually because it's just so, goddamn good to listen to.
Yeah, again, and they're all points that I've kind of touched on at least a little bit. But I mean, it's so strange and so out there. But like at the core of most of these songs is like catchy melodies and like usually very good bass lines in the back. Even though a lot of the bass lines are kind of simple, they're all still like really just groovy and carry the tracks. The drums are sampled from a bunch of like old like funk songs from like the 1960s and 70s that also really help to drive each and every song. And yeah, I mean, it's just unlike um, any real song or any real album from that time period. And I feel like now it's still becoming, because I talk with friends, I've talked with like students, it seems to be like becoming more and more, especially for people who want to branch out into different genres of music, because it combines so many different things and it's, so tied to influences that you can't really pin down. Like it's become a pretty essential album, I feel like, for a lot of people. For It's become an essential album for like white boys who like to get a little funky with it.
It's an accurate assessment. Thank you. So Tyler, you essentially went here with the Opeth record Ghost Reveries for this like kind of 20-year commemoration of all of these different albums.
Yes, that's correct.
And what made you go with this one out of all of the records from that long ago? Like, what's making this one like really stand out for you to this day?
Well, for this one, actually, it's kind of a funny story. I did a 33 and a third pitch to the Bloomsbury series of books where each book is about an album from history, and I
Right,
decided
right.
to write about Ghost Reveries
Hmm.
because to me, in my pitch, it ultimately did not get selected, but I used the tagline, "It's a Swedish sweet spot," because of course they're a Swedish band, and to me, Ghost Reveries represents a perfect distillation of all of their sounds. You have the earlier, more extreme stuff from albums like Blackwater Park, a little bit of black and death metal influence. And then, as you know, their more recent albums have been more progressive rock and 70s it focused. And Ghost Reveries, for one, it's got a perfect blend. You've got the extreme stuff for those who like the more uh, hardcore metal, and then you have the more progressive influence with a full-time keyboardist added to the mix and some really great clean vocals, and the production is just so crisp you could eat dinner off of it.
Hmm. And with like this time past that has gone by since the album has come out, and the record's obviously like really withstood the test of time, not just as like a widely celebrated metal album, but like one of the best in the band's discography, if not the best. Very few records and bands comparatively have kind of done as well critically and commercially when it comes to kind of fusing these two sounds together. Like, what do
Mhm.
you feel like, Opeth kind of brings to these styles of music by, making these death metal elements and these progressive rock elements work in tandem?
Oh, well, that's a good question. When I first started getting into rock music and heavier music, I started with bands like Led Zeppelin, and then in high school, I was kind of an edgy Tool fan. And I don't listen to Led Zeppelin or Tool as much anymore, but they're both important to me. And I think one thing you can say about the both of them is that they have a lot of dynamics, a lot of quiet, loud, quiet flow, and they bring both really intense stuff and also more subdued and brooding passages to their music as well. And Opeth, when they're really firing on all cylinders, and they can be hit or miss, I won't lie. But on an album like Ghost Reveries, they take those aforementioned bands to school in some ways for me. And being hit with really uh, pummeling extreme stuff like parts of tracks like Ghost of Perdition or Baying for the Hounds, or The Baying of the Hounds, excuse me. And then also getting these acoustic passages that don't feel shoehorned in, which I feel was kind of a problem with earlier Opeth material. It kind of sounds like riff salad,
Hmm.
like it's not all cohesive. And then you have some tracks which are just calm, like Isolation Years, the closer, which I think they wanted to release as a single, but they thought that too many fans would jump on them for that. But to answer your question, I think that Opeth take uh, the idea of dynamics, and rather than making it awkward or stiff like they did on albums like Morning Rise from 1996, they make it sound natural, and they kind of turn up a dial that bands like Tool and Zeppelin were utilizing, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Hmm. And how long have you been listening to this album? Like, just give me a bit of a timeline.
Well, I learned about Opeth around 2017 through Blackwater Park.
Okay.
And for a while, that was the only album I listened to. And that's probably their best known album.
Hmm.
Um, Ghost Reveries I didn't discover until later. And the track that hooked me actually was the big single that they used to get the American market excited, because they signed to Roadrunner, which
Hmm.
was a major label for this album. Bands like Nickelback are on Roadrunner.
Right.
Yeah. And they had this track, The Grand Conjuration. And The Grand Conjuration it's pretty long. It's 10 and a half minutes, but it's got a verse, chorus thing going on, which is unusual for Opeth. And it has these very Tool-like riffs, very excellent drumming and percussion. And that was the track that really hit me. And then I discovered, I think, Ghost of Perdition, because so many people call that among the best Opeth songs. It routinely ranks in the top five or three or the best.
Hmm.
And I know that track like the back of my hand, but it just yanked me around. And I thought, damn, this is what I like. This is what I want Opeth to sound like. You know what I mean?
Well, I asked because obviously the record was like very well received by a lot of metal fans when it kind of came out of the gate, and it's an album that you've had time to kind of like sit with as well. What do you feel like, despite the album being, celebrated pretty soon upon release,
Mhm.
have, listeners and fans maybe come to learn about it, or you have come to learn about it with the extended period of time that you've had to kind of like listen to it and observe other people kind of like having it grow with them over the past 2 decades?
Yeah. Well, in my book draft, doing my research, I found that the reception to the album when it came out, it had a lot of haters. A lot of people
Mm.
were scared that Opeth were going to go mallcore or whatever, because all of the guitar tones were so clean and
Oh.
so perfect. Like even Michael Ockerfeldt said, this is Journey death metal, because
Mm.
it was so crisp. And then after that album, they came out with Watershed, which was a little weirder,
Mm.
but and Watershed's my personal favorite. But there were also some softer moments. And then I remember you did a review of this next one when it came out on your channel, Heritage, in
Right.
2011. And that's when they went full 70s prog, the retro review. And don't get me wrong, I like Heritage, but when that album came out, it caused a shitstorm. And everything subsequently has been kind of a mixed bag. Some people like it a lot, some people hate it, but none of Opeth's more modern albums really have entered the canon of metal the way that Blackwater Park and Still Life and this album, Ghost Reveries. And I think it kind of marked a turning point for Opeth with much more of the keyboards coming in and more atmospheric, softer passages driving things. But I think people also recognize it as having a healthy dose of real metal without sounding too forced. Like their last album that came out, The Last Will and Testament last year, it had the death growls come back a little bit, but it's still very prog driven, if you know what I mean.
Andy,
Yeah,
um, Madonna, Confessions on a Dance Floor.
the one and only.
I mean, pretty significant moment in Madonna's career, considering the very bold embrace she made of dance music during this time period with a few different records. What makes this one in this era stand out for you, and what makes you feel like it kind of, has held some water over the past 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because when you look at this sort of portion of Madonna's career, sort of Ray of Light and onward, I think that lately, particularly this year, Ray of Light and Music are kind of the albums that are really getting their time to shine and getting a lot of recognition as key inspirations for, people like FKA Twigs on Eusexua or Addison Rae on her album. And I think that those albums are obviously very significant and brilliant too. But this one I think is really key, not just in how it sounds, and I think it sounds awesome. I think it's this like really incredibly produced, rich dance, disco, electropop album that just feels so good in the ears. But also, at this point in her career, she had reinvented herself so many times. And I think that people looked at Ray of Light as sort of the last one that she was really kind of capable of doing. And then a few years later, and she really comes back with this album that really kind of owns her heritage, owns the dance floor that she really has been working in for her entire career. And so, in kind of contemporary pop, you look at albums like Renaissance by Beyonce or Jessie Ware's That Feels Good and What's Your Pleasure. And I think that these albums of pop stars who have done so much already, but then, at a point of a bit more maturity, come back and really make these straightforward, homages to dance music. It really kind of all comes from Confessions on a Dance Floor.
Does looking at this album, not even in the context of today, but in the context of Madonna's whole career, because by this point she had already had so many different eras and was still making records that are aging well, still making bangers. Does this make you reflect at all in terms of the kind of shelf life that we're seeing of pop artists today versus pop artists of Madonna's era?
I mean, totally. I think Madonna is first and foremost a very good curator. I think when you look at her choices of what producers to work with or what sort of aesthetics to take on and then maybe move away from in the next album, like she's does that like no other, and I think her longevity proves that. And this album just kind of came out of a slightly more difficult period in her career. American Life, which is the album that precedes this, wasn't quite as beloved. It was a bit more political, a bit more commentary about, the state of things, particularly with the Iraq war at the time. And this one was just kind of a complete restart. You hear it from the moment the album kicks off with Hung Up, which is just, an unbelievable song that, multiple generations of Madonna fans can just absolutely adore, because how could you not? And I think it's just a testament to her instincts and her instincts on, what she needs to do next to kind of keep the ball rolling. I think it's no coincidence that I think actually today, the day we're recording this, she's really officially announcing part 2 of this album. So she's doing Confessions on a Dance Floor part 2, once again working with Stuart Price, who is the main producer on this album, once again releasing through Warner Records. So I think it's obvious why she wants to return to this, because, I wouldn't say the last few Madonna records have been all that great. And it's a clear, this album always kind of represents a fresh start. And I think it's clear.
Yeah, I mean, haven't been that great. And on top of it, you have numerous younger artists who are kind of reheating the nachos of this album, as it were, if you want to call it that. But you kind of brought up, obviously, the fact that within so many new releases from different artists, we're kind of seeing the aesthetics of this album, the aesthetics of this Madonna era being rehashed. Are the ripples and influences of this record cropping up in your view in the current pop scene in more subtle ways, or ways that kind of move beyond just oh, this album sounds like this, and I'm just going to kind of, gleam onto this synth style or this kind of beat or this kind of perk?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting that you say that because I do think that this album on its own is kind of a sort of amorphous, shapeless reinterpretation of 70s and 80s dance music already. So already you're kind of having a displacement. You're having, Madonna revisiting disco and, the Human League and these sort of different dance acts at the time that had a lot of in common, but weren't the same. And she's already kind of merging it together. And so then you have artists from now who are then pulling from this album, which is already, I don't want to call it watered down because I do think it's an amazing album, but is sort of distant from its sort of source
It's
material.
already in homage in a way.
Exactly. And I think you look at, Dua Lipa's Future Nostalgia as an album that's paying an homage to Confessions on a Dance Floor. And so from there, we're kind of getting, a few steps out. We're getting an homage to an homage. So I do hear it. I would say that, there's always a lot of talk about the big disco dance records of the 2020 of that year. And I would say that those albums probably resemble Confessions on a Dance Floor a bit more sonically. But again, in terms of the attitude, the reinvention, the sort of commitment to making dance music as a place of relief and of feeling liberated, that you hear all the time.
Leah, you went with Sufjan Stevens, Illinois, one of my favorites. Obviously, this is a record that is aged very well over the past 20 years. Lots of ink has been spilled on it, not only at the time that it came out, but in retrospect. Why is this album still standing out to you after all these years?
I mean, honestly, in terms of 2005 specifically, I feel like this is the only record that I have much to say about. I'm a big fan of Sufjan. I'm from Illinois. I don't live there anymore, but I have a great deal of pride for that state. And I feel like despite him having never actually even lived there, he tells the story of, things that have happened there and kind of just evokes the spirit of it in a way that seems so effortless, despite how bombastic and maximalist all of the instrumentation is. And we're in these other discussions of these albums, we're talking about, the ways that these records have been seminal to albums that have come out in the last 5-10 years. I don't think anyone has attempted to do something like this. I think there are people that are trying to bite like Arcade Fire from this time. I don't think anyone's trying to take a bite of Sufjan's nachos. No one's attempting.
Why do you think that is?
It takes a really great deal of ambition to make something like this. It takes very like kind of once in a lifetime like composer chops to make something like this. The oh my god, the specificity to which a lot of these songs have been researched on just a historical level, and how he's able to tie this back either into his own experiences or into kind of hearkening to his religion, which I feel like is never done in any sort of poor taste, is just something that I feel like only he can create, and is not something that someone should even try to replicate. Because, I mean, not that this is what he's most known for, but there are so many like modern classical records and side projects that Sufjan has been a part of. I think one of my favorite records of his is the BQE, which is just a hour-long orchestral suite about the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, about like a traffic jam, and it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about just the lack of, I guess, like direct copying you see of his stuff, for anybody having not done anything quite like this in the wake of this album. And I think that just comes with the territory of him having this unparalleled ability to really just commit to a certain project or idea or concept once he kind of, sets out to do it. I mean, obviously, and this is something clearly he had to learn from early on. Like, there are times where he bites off more than he can chew. There's no fucking way he's finishing that 50 States project.
It was a joke. It was never, never supposed to be.
But but still, he had done it a couple times, you know, and it's like it had happened to a degree where people were like really starting to think like, is there like a possibility of this? But like when he does go out and, as you said, you know, try to do a composition piece, or like, you know, commit to like this multi ambient project drop, or, you know, a series of songs that are like deeply influenced by films, like he kind of goes out there and he executes it in a way that, you know, nobody else can.
And he's doing this through, I mean, especially in recent years, so much like personal strife has hit him. And I think that honestly makes it all the more impressive to me. Um, you know, having been diagnosed with, I forgot what it was called, but it was the like thing that made him paralyzed from the waist down, and losing his partner right before the release of Javelin. Um, you know, like if he, and he's even hinting that like maybe I would tour again in the future, which like I feel like he doesn't owe that to anyone. And if he decided to retire tomorrow, I think he will have been ending his career on a high note, and will be like, has already cemented his legacy in spades.
I mean, you know, I remember the time period, you know, the era in which this album um, came out, and obviously, like, it's you know, still pretty well loved and celebrated today. Um, but simultaneously, I don't know, it does feel like it, in a way, kind of sad that like you know, we are sort of in a much different era of Sufjan's career. I, you know, it doesn't feel like he's at a place where we're never going to hear any music from him again. Like, I still think there's like a lot of creative gas left in the tank. But simultaneously, it does feel like a little scary and, I guess, unnerving to uh, kind of, as we further go down 20 years away from this record, to some degree, at least in my own view, feel like, man, you know, I kind of feel like we haven't really seen anybody who is like kind of hitting us with this same talent level, you know, that he was when he like first started really making waves in the indie scene. And, you know, a lot of his music does directly deal with like mortality. And, you know, it's kind of hard not to think of, once that talent is gone and he's gone, like, what, you know, that's just going to be gone. You know, there's no replacing it.
I would argue, I think Cameron Winter and Geese are getting kind of close. Not that I think that they're making the same thing by any means, but I do feel like we are kind of with them seeing like the emergence of like really like a generational talent. Like I know that I am not the first person to toot that horn, but I do believe that it is worth like, you know, trying to call it ahead of time.
Oh yeah, and look, that's it's not to say that, like, you know, the current music landscape is like without, you know, incredible and impressive levels of talent and great albums. You know, I'm hearing great stuff all the time. But you know, nobody has quite impressed me in the way that Sufjan has over this, you know, 20-year period, in terms of like him just being such an incredible polymath. You know, just like anything he seems to touch or do or try, he seems to do it at least well enough to where I'm blown away, or I'm at least like, well, maybe this isn't my cup of tea, but like, you know, he seems to be doing it just as well as anybody else, you know, who would be operating in that lane. It's just kind of crazy, just the versatility.
Oh yeah, he made like a 2 hour long ambient album during the pandemic. Like, and you know, no promo for it. It just kind of was put out there, and I use it all the time to do like work and stuff. It's very nice, calming music.
Alex,
Anthony.
we went with the Carter 2, which I mean is not the Carter 3, but also it's 2025. So we're not talking about that album being 20 years old yet. But still, you know, the Carter 2 doesn't get brought up maybe as often as it should in, you know, these kinds of conversations when it comes to like, you know, this era of Lil Wayne's discography and how it's aged. You know, so let's like advocate for the record a little bit and just start off by telling me like what you feel like makes it still a significant project in his catalog 20 years later.
When you got to think about the Carter 2, you got to kind of think about like Wayne's whole career up to that point. You know, he began with Hot Boys and the whole New Orleans scene. He was cutting his teeth with BG, Turk, Juvenile. He kind of embodied those sounds a bit heavily. The album before this, I think, was called 500 Degrees, which is
Hmm.
like a bit too close to home if you want to make your own sound. And when he came out with the Carter One, it was kind of in that same vein. It's still really great music, but he's kind of indebted to these artists, particularly uh, Manny Fresh. Manny Fresh kind of made the hit on that first album, Go DJ. And after a couple like legal disputes, uh, he is kicked off this record, Carter 2, and Wayne is kind of having to prove um, I can be beyond the New Orleans bounds. He still gets like gritty and southern, but he makes a name for himself.
And is that, through obviously like the trademark one-liners and, unparalleled charisma that like he would kind of go viral for a little bit later down the road? Like, how is that kind of taking shape at this point in the Wayne catalog?
Well, he stopped writing his bars after around the Carter One. So you kind of see his like specific kind of craftsmanship develop where he relies heavily on end rhymes. He is using hoop bars a lot, which I know you like. And
Love those. One of my
he's getting
favorites.
kind of silly, but also saying some really deep stuff. It's interesting because he has like tracks that go about, I want to marry this girl. I'm sorry that my friend died. I'm the best. I'm the best. I'm the best. And that's kind of his kind of track run throughout this album, just one after another. And the thing that what's kind of admirable about Wayne is he doesn't really stop. You could criticize him a lot for his output, particularly like over the last couple years. The Carter series should have ended at 5, in my opinion, but uh, he doesn't really stop, and that's kind of goes with his continuous freestyle philosophy. Is I'm gonna keep on putting out what I want, my thoughts. I'm not indebted to a I don't know specific contract yet. That becomes bad later, but and he is rapping in a way that's different from the first Carter, where it's mostly like twerk jams, like booty jams, go DJ. Uh, what else? This is the Carter. That one that's like, I bring it back to the bottom of the map. Whoa, it is bring it back to the. I mean, they're all great songs. Don't get me wrong, but this album has receipts. It is crazy. That song "Receipt" is crazy.
20 years down the road after this record's release, the general quality of his albums has changed extensively. The expectations and standards and everything that we know about hip hop music and what a new hip hop album should sound like and should be has changed extensively too. Like, where do you feel like this album sits in the modern rap Rubicon with just the whole context in which it was birthed being like completely gone now?
Well, it's kind of going with the whole Wayne doesn't stop philosophy. He kind of throws a lot of stuff out there, and some of it might not stick, but he really brings up some really compelling ideas, some interesting themes. And that's kind of a thing that we see now with like the whole streaming era where we have like loaded albums and stuff, which is kind of a sad part to the methodology. But
Hmm.
it kind of shows that when Wayne is focused, a bit curated, he is capable of putting out phenomenal material.
Well, I think you're correct in your assessment that like, Wayne's maximal approach and just kind of like recording and putting out everything that he can, especially during this time period, like that is very much reflected in the way a lot of artists are dropping their stuff now, especially in the streaming era. But like, what do you feel like made that model work for him personally to where it just kind of feels like, I don't know, overdone or even detrimental to the output of a lot of modern artists? Like, what was Wayne doing that kind of, actually made it work to his benefit?
Honestly, I don't know. He has this kind of mythical, untouchable quality to
Hmm.
him because he is like around so many like pop circles. He is like recognized greatly as being like a very popular artist, not really a pop musician, but he's in the pop sphere. But he's also in like the heady hip hopper, like backpacker side, where he has like a bunch of mixtapes, which he started the dedicated series like a week after this album.
Right. I mean,
Um,
there was that period of, I would say, like, you know, in the late 2000s, like you say, where he and his popularity was kind of like transcending every segment of the music industry altogether. And, you know, he sort of seemed to appeal to every kind of hip hop fan. And, you know, there was even a debate that he, you know, had the potential to be the greatest rapper of all time, if not, you know, was considered just the greatest rapper walking at that point during that period.
there is a track on the Carter 2 called Greatest Rapper Alive. So he's kind of a bit prophetic in that way.
Mm.
But it's kind of sad how the Carter 2 is seen in retrospect because like people acknowledge 1 is the starting point and 3 and 4 is having the big hits and 5 is being the great comeback with the legal disputes and the Kendrick Lamar feature.
Right.
And Carter 2 is just kind of put, it's not really acknowledged in that regard, which is kind of sad because it's weirdly his most consistent and probably his best album. He has great mixtapes, but albums, like commercial releases, this might be his best.
I mean, there is kind of like I don't know, I guess you could say a downfall or a downward turn that most fans would agree with when it comes to a lot of his more recent material. Like, do you attribute that to him not doing his, you know, not to sound like dismissive, but like usual shtick as well as he used to? Or do you feel like it's due to a lack of change and evolution, you know? Because I mean, I guess my question is it a matter of him not continuing to work hard to kind of keep the formula exciting and interesting, or has the formula kind of been phased out?
I feel like at some point he realized that he could just like put the fries in the bag and then, ship out a tape and then it's over.
Not the fries
But
in the bag.
that's kind of what it is. It's
Yeah.
very utilitarian. I need 16 bars. I'm gonna put it here. Like but when he is like dedicated to something, he stuff like really shine. That's kind of the conflict with a lot of Wayne fans is that we listen to the album or like the album's not good, but then he puts out a verse on like I don't know, a Tyler the Creator album or Conway the Machine, and it's like phenomenal. And you're just like,
Right.
where was this on your own stuff?
Hmm.
And he's capable of putting out these great verses like he did in 2005. Where is it 20 years later? And it's probably a mix of like issues, like health. He has had like health reasons over the last 10 years. And of course, a bunch of legal stuff. And also, he might just be a little tired and he just wants to like put the fries in the bag and just put out a quick tape.
All right. Alex, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And there you have it. Thank you for watching. A shout out to everybody who took part in this conversation. Shout out to you for watching. And check out the piece over at theneedledrop.com again, because we didn't even talk about every album that is listed out in the entire feature. Over here next to my head is another video to check out. What is an album turning 20 this year that you feel like is still exciting to you? I'm sure in the comments you'll let me know. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Anthony Fantano, albums turning 20 forever.